Good morning, everybody. It is the second Sunday of the month, and that means here at the Feast, we are doing a service Sunday. Here locally in Providence, we are doing something to help serve our neighbors and make the world a better place. And so we do not have our typical worship service, but I do still care about you folks online and want to give you a little bit of content. And so every week that we do this, we try to provide a thought for you. As we've been spending some more time in service and thinking more about serving our neighbors, one of the things that has been going through my mind is the ways that we manage to defeat service, the ways that we manage to not do service. My experience in the church is that Christians often think it's a good thing to do, and they want to help take care of their neighbors and to do something to be the hands and feet of Jesus in the world. All these like lovely little phrases and idioms that we have. But then when you actually go to do it, there is sort of sometimes a kind of a mumbling of like, oh, well, I don't know if I can make it, or oh, I don't know if that week is a good week for me. And people kind of can flake out. And there's a lot of reasons why we think it's a good idea to serve, but then actually doing the service can sometimes be hard, or that people feel uncomfortable when they're asked to get out of their pew and actually go do something, or that they feel like it's somehow not church. And the reality is that there's a lot of reasons that happens. We talked about a month ago when we had a service Sunday about this idea of like, well, is it ministry enough? Is it spiritual enough? We talked about the whole person, that we need to help people's physical and spiritual needs. But another one that I think we have is when we get overwhelmed by just the immensity of the challenge before us. For a lot of us, like today, we're collecting supplies to help send over to a local organization, Crossroads, that helps deal with those who are housing insecure or homeless. And I think it's easy to look at that problem and think, wow, that is just so big of a problem. What could we possibly do? Like, we would just be a drop in the bucket. There's no way that we could fix that problem. And we know that's true. We know that the number of people who do not have a home, or the number of people who don't have an adequate home, or who spend too much on rent, or the housing shortage, the inability of young people to afford a place. I mean, there's all sorts of issues that are really, really complicated. And even if you were the president or the mayor, you would probably feel a sense of what could I possibly do to fix this problem? And sometimes we allow that feeling to stop us from being engaged and to try to do things. I think this is an interesting challenge because I think there's a cultural piece behind it. I am suspicious that in America, we are so in love with our individuals and our stories of great individual success that we kind of think about problems of, is it something that I can fix? We sort of think of these great heroes of government or industry or whatever as people that sort of single-handedly changed the world. And a lot of times we do that even to the detriment of all the other people that were involved. A lot of you know I'm fascinated by the Disney company and the way Disney has formed their sort of media empire and the theme parks and all that kind of stuff I find very interesting. But the way you would hear some people tell it, Walt Disney kind of sat down at a desk and started drawing, and the next thing you know, Disneyland just popped up from his imagination. And the reality is, no, there had to be dozens and hundreds and thousands of other people that were involved, even for someone that had singular vision. And the same is true of the world around us, right? Things don't get solved one organization or one person at a time. I think you would find that a lot of times when you see a movie, a fictional movie based on a person's life, they kind of tell it as them doing something. And then if you watch a documentary on someone's life, they actually spend a lot of time talking about the supporting cast of characters and all the other people who were involved. I read a book years ago about mission work in New Zealand. Fran and I were interested in doing mission work in New Zealand years ago. And we still kind of are interested now. We live here, but we love New Zealand. We've loved visiting. And in my time reading this book, he talked about something that I might butcher here, but he talked about something called tall poppy syndrome. this experience they had in New Zealand where there was this real strong sense of democracy and equality in the people they worked with. And from his American perspective, it really made it hard for them to develop leaders because they were trying to get people to to rise up and take a role of responsibility. And tall poppy syndrome is this idea that when one of the people starts to rise above the others, that there's a societal sort of thing where they cut them down. They will criticize them or make fun of them or just somehow put pressure on them to lower themselves back down because exceptionalism and individualism is not something that, in his experience, they valued. And in America, I think we do a little bit the opposite. For many of us, we want someone to rise above and fix our problems and be the guy to take charge. And we'd love it if there was a champion for some issue at church that would take care of things so that we didn't even have to think about it. And we can be a little bit different that way. But all these things can work against our efforts to go bless the world. I can be really guilty of only wanting to get engaged in something if I know that in the end, I will make a significant difference. That they'll put a statue up that said, Caleb fixed this problem. And I don't know, is that ego? I think for some of us it is. I think that sneaks in a little bit. But I think sometimes it's just that our imaginations have been limited to that's the way the world changes, is by singular people or singular organizations. As churches, are we going to get engaged in an issue if we're going to be the 15th most important entity in helping with that issue? Or are we going to do it if they're going to notice us in the newspaper or in local organizations? Or do we do it just to do it? Is it okay to be one tiny piece of a much bigger story? And I think that the reality is we should be okay being a small piece of a big story. And it's okay to be relatively inconsequential because all those things together add up. And we don't have to be the singular entity that makes a difference. There was a famous moment in the 1960s where John Lennon, I think joking, teased that the Beatles had become bigger than Jesus. And of course, given the culture of the 1960s in America, that was very offensive. People were really upset. And I won't get into John Lennon and his religious beliefs or lack thereof. But what I think is interesting is that I think he was definitely right in as much as the Beatles during their lifetime and their career were definitely a much bigger deal in their culture than Jesus was in his culture during his lifetime. It's so hard for us because Jesus is Jesus. I mean, quite literally the most famous person on the planet. To remember that during his life, he was, an itinerant preacher that was in the back hills of Galilee, probably not getting a whole ton of attention from Rome or the emperor. If you asked the historical question, did the Caesar in Jesus' time know who he was? Probably not. Maybe he saw something about him in a report after his death. But, Jesus did the things that Jesus did to make the world a better place. And it grew and it developed as the church grew and developed. But Jesus himself dies very lonely and unsupported and seemingly inconsequentially. And so there's something to be said about just doing your job the best you can. I want to read a little section here from Romans 12. You guys probably know this passage if you've been in churches or been a Christian for a long time. You've heard this a million times. But this is Paul being really helpful for us about the ways that we serve. And I think this could be true of how we as individuals serve within a church body or of how individual churches serve within the church universally. For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourselves with sober judgment, in accordance with the measure of faith God has given you. This is really interesting. He says, don't think of yourself more highly than you ought, do it soberly. In other words, don't be drunk on your idea that you are hot stuff. Just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function. So in Christ, we who are many form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts according to the grace given to us. If a man's gift is prophesying, let him use it in proportion to his faith. If it's serving, let him serve. If it's teaching, let him teach. If it's encouraging, let him encourage. If it is contributing to the needs of others, let him give generously. If it is leadership, let him govern diligently. If it is showing mercy, let him do it cheerfully. This idea that we're all part of a bigger piece. It's interesting that a few weeks ago I mentioned this passage in Philippians where Paul says that if we work with each other and we don't grumble, we'll be like stars in the sky or the stars out in the universe. I think my American brain hears that I could be like a star, and I think of like a Hollywood star, that I could be this singularly important person that's really fabulous at doing what they do. But then I think of what the night sky would have looked like for an ancient person before light pollution. And being a star is being one of a million points of light out in the universe. The core of a lot of what I'm thinking about today all happened just one morning in my drive to work this week. We had just had, we're having this terrible like slush, snow, ice season at this point. And thankfully, no more 3 feet of snow blizzards. But we had this night the other night where it kind of rained, sleeted. And what it did, it has covered all the tree branches and just a 1/4 inch of water that had frozen and was icy. And then the sun had come up that morning. And so a couple things were happening. The sun was hitting that snow and ice and slush, and it was kind of misting in a very light mist that was coming up off the ground. And then all the trees were all glazed with ice. And then the sun came through, and it was the brightest morning I have ever had driving to work. I mean, not blinding light, but just like you were in a movie and it was like a heaven or, paradise scene and everything glowed all around you because the sun was hitting every little droplet of water that was coming up in the mist, and it was bouncing off every single tree branch. And I was thinking about all of the light that was hitting my eyes as I drove, that it was coming and then hitting those tree branches and deflecting through the ice and into my eyeballs and through the mist and off the pavement. And that all just created this beautiful angelic white glow. It was just really something to behold as I was driving to work. And I was thinking about service and the things we were getting ready to do this week, and just how much that is just a beautiful metaphor for what God does through us and God does through the church. That we are all just one little branch, one little twig that catches the light of God that comes into our lives and then tries to reflect it back. And that when we're all doing it together in concert, like that morning with the frozen branches, it creates this incredibly bright light. Now, no one of those branches is producing a whole lot of lumens, right? Lumens is how we measure the strength of a light. None of those are particularly bright, but when they all pop together, it made a big difference. And if, as the Bible talks about, if one part of the body says, well, I'm not going to participate, then the body's in trouble. If one of your organs just decides to give up, it's not good. And in the same way, that brightness I experienced that morning, it needed all of the attendant parts to do their job and to participate. And that's what we're called to as Christians, to do our job, to participate, to try. I think it's really easy for churches to give up on trying to go about God's work. I had a difficult conversation recently, and the thing that came out of the conversation for me was that I think we really have it twisted in church. We sort of have gotten this idea that we exist to study the Bible and to worship, which we do those things. Hopefully we do those things well. But in the end, that's not why we're here. I feel like churches that are super involved in worship and Bible study and never really get around to any type of service or justice or whatever in the world in most Christians' minds, are doing their job. But then churches that get involved with, helping the poor and don't do as much Bible study and worship, they're not real Christians somehow. And I just think there's something weird about that. There's a balance. It's what we talked about, a month ago, this balance of the spiritual and the physical and all those things. Absolutely. I'm not saying to ignore any of it. But part of our journey here at the Feast, and hopefully a journey that we can help encourage you online to join with us in, is be active in your faith, meaning do something to help the world. A Jesus that came to preach that he wanted to save the world, that then ignores the ways that the world is broken, is just not a Jesus who's concerned with people. He's a Jesus concerned in building his own kingdom, building his own little church club. At the Feast, we felt convicted that we can't do that. We shouldn't do that. And so that's what we're going through. This is why we have these service Sundays. I hope those thoughts are helpful for you. We're trying to do our little part. I hope you can do your part. If you have bread and juice this morning, I would pray that you take communion with us. We will here in a minute all gather together. And after we do this service, we take communion. Those things are intimately connected in our minds. This idea that when we care for God's people in the world, we also are mindful of the body of Christ, and that those things connect in a way I'm not going to bore you with another mini sermon to talk about. But I hope you have time this morning to take communion, remember what Jesus has done for you, the way that God has shown his light into your life, and then think about ways that you might reflect it to others. Have a great morning. God bless. We'll talk to you soon.